Yeah. Shouts to Red Alert. Yeah. My New York folk know about that. What's up, everybody who's checking in? This is the pre-show, the pre-game, the before the party, before the after party. We're getting ready for another live episode of Hip Hop Can Save America with Manny Faces. This, of course, is a podcast. It's been around for some time. If you're just checking us out for the first time, you might have seen me doing this live, giving you some time to trickle in before we go official. Every episode this month, Monday through Thursday, is live, right where you see me. So, let's see, make sure all my connections are connected. And if you can see me, hear me, smell me, taste me, feel me, say hi in the comment section of wherever you're wherever you're watching me. You don't have to, but it's nice. Okay. My guest is coming in. I will dip off and then wait for that. So yeah, whoever's tuned in, I do say hello. Thank you for joining me once again. We are live and direct. Shouts to Jay Webb on the check-in. All right. So we're getting ready. We have a guest, live guest in the background, getting ready to come and join us, which is great. This is what the whole thing is about. Live guests every day. While you learn more about how hip hop can save America, which means just means like improving society, improving humanity, and a bunch of innovative and inspiring and inspirational and inspiring and sometimes surprising ways. So you guys are seeing the the pre-show. In mere moments, we'll be live talking about that in a way that's really interesting. The hip-hop education movement is large and active and beautiful, and part of that includes subjects that you might not normally associate with hip-hop. So that's what we're going to get into. So you guys are watching the pre-show. We're about to go live official, like the proverbial referee with the metaphorical whistle. And then we'll be good to go. Okay. All right, let's get to it. There's no need to delay and stall anymore. It is theme song time. You won't see the theme song, but there's a theme song.
The thing about hip-hop is it's smart. It's insightful. The way that they can communicate a complex message in a very short space is remarkable. And a lot of these kids, they're not going to be reading the New York Times. That's not how they're getting their information.
My hip-hop will rock and shock the nation. Hip-hop culture is more than music.
Peace to you and speak the truth. Showing what peace can do and there reach for you.
My hip-hop will rock and shock the nation. Rap is something you do. Hip-hop is something you live.
So hip-hop didn't invent anything, but hip-hop reinvented everything.
Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. Whether you're on the East Coast like me or west of the East, then it might still be morning. So, and you might be listening to this later. So the time is irrelevant. Hello to you, and thank you for joining me for another episode of Hip Hop Can Save America. It's your man, Manny Faces, live and direct from Newark, New Jersey. Brick City is in the house. We are here bringing this podcast to life, following a bunch of episodes that have appeared on the podcast feed over the past couple of years. I decided that pandemic life wasn't complicated enough, and I would do this every day for the month of September. Well, almost every day, Mondays through Thursdays, 1 p.m. Eastern, sharp, and then a special bonus episode will appear magically on your podcast feed if you're subscribing there. So, to the podcast feed listeners, I know this might be a little bit different, but studies have shown, a very scientific study of me looking at the numbers, that you actually don't mind the daily drop on the podcast feed. So thank you for sticking with me and sticking with this idea and this concept through the month of September. If you also like kind of that long, in-depth, highly edited, a lot of less stumbling over words than I do in real life, you'll still get those full episodes on Friday. Matter of fact, last Friday, we just dropped a really great interview with a teaching artist, an instructor, an MC, a beatboxer, a game show creator, but a freestyle rap artist extraordinaire. And not only just being an artist, David B.S. Bradshaw is also a practitioner and someone who's developing workshops and training and something he calls freestyle fitness and a props freestyle game show, all going off the top of the head, that kind of freestyle, but showing the benefits, the sometimes unexpected benefits that practicing or participating in freestyle rap can bring, not just to artists in hip hop, but in corporate boardrooms, sort of as a public speaking tool. So many great things and gems came out of that interview. So you can find that only. That was not live. That was only on the podcast feed. So wherever you get podcasts, Hip Hop Can Save America. Just search, you'll find, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, et cetera, et cetera. Thanks to Funkadelic Studios. Also, once again, if you're in New York City or the New York City area, if you're a musician itching to get back to your music playing ness after pandemic has now finally opened up some things, Funkadelic Studios rehearsal space, recording space is open in New York City. Very safe, very disinfected, high-tech stuff, UV rays and gamma rays. I don't know. That's probably not true, but definitely safe and open for you to participate. So check out Funkadelic Studios. I believe they have some discount prices happening right now to entice people to come back and get their music recording and rehearsing on. I know a lot of musicians in and around New York City have been aching to do that. And lastly, for today, just as you know, the beginning of the show, housekeeping. If you're listening to this show, you'll find this other thing that I do very insightful, and I think you'll want to participate in it. It's the Hip Hop Advocate, is a newsletter that goes out every now and then. I want to say every couple of weeks. It goes out every now and then. It doesn't bombard you. It's not a daily thing. But when it goes out, it's thick. It's just chock full of really great curated articles. What I do is I hand pick and hand curate articles from all over the web, all over the world, that look at, again, this kind of thing that we're talking about here on this show, the intersection of hip hop and different areas of interest in society. So not the gossipy entertainment stuff, but the hip hop applications in education or health and wellness and science and technology and political activism and all the fine arts. So the Hip Hop Advocate newsletter can be found in a couple of places. The easiest thing to do for that and this podcast is to go to the Center for Hip Hop Advocacy, which is at hiphopadvocacy.org online. But again, if you Google these things, they'll come up. Our SEO game is proper. Okay, housekeeping out of the way. Once again, thank you for joining me live. If you're tuned in, I can see your comments, so do say hi, and that's okay if you're not listening live. There's been plenty of interest in the on-demand portion of this. I'm very happy to have a guest with us today. I'm happy to have guests any day. I'm just glad that everyone was participating and coming on time and not messing me up live. So that's very, very thankful. I'm very thankful to everyone who's done it so far. But we are going to continue with this streak. We have the entire month booked, so everything is going well. And to kick it off today, the first full week of this madness that I'm attempting to pull off here, and I got to get all my technology great, so give me a second here. And I believe we will have our guest for the day to discuss this intersection of hip hop and education, specifically through a mathematics lens. Dr. Marti Cason, how are you? I'm doing well. I'm glad you can hear me. I'm sounding good to you? All right. I had to correct your name spelling. I bet you get that a lot. The Carson instead of Cason. Yes, Cason. Well, we got it straight. I'm very diligent about my fact checking live. So, good morning to you, because you are west of east. Yes. Got it. DFW, they call it, right? I was out there in Fort Worth area, somewhere on a ranch, doing some talk a couple of years ago, but I enjoyed the area very much. Thank you for taking the time out to do this with me today. Happy Labor Day. And I would like you to, I could read your bio and do all that stuff, but I'd like to, if you would, please just kind of let listeners and watchers know, how you present yourself professionally to the world, who you are and what you do. Right. Got it. There are coyotes around there, I hear, but that's, yeah. Okay. All right. And what does your day-to-day look like in your professional role? Yeah.
Doing their student teaching, and then I also teach a course, an introductory course to pre-service teachers like secondary ed, and get them introduced to our program. Okay. And then this semester I actually took on a couple courses they gave me for alternative certification. So
for alternative, sorry, say it again.
Alternative certification.
Okay. All right. So early education?
Secondary ed.
Secondary. Okay, got you. Okay. So I've followed you for a long time. We've been kind of crossing paths online. We've been dealing with the HipHopEd movement, and shouts to the entire hashtag HipHopEd Twitter chat that happens Tuesday nights, 9:00 Eastern, and everyone affiliated with that. I've had some people on this show that have been kind of surrounding or involved in that, as you have very actively been participating. The interesting angle, of course, is that you're coming at this from a mathematics angle. That's kind of your area. First of all, how did you first get involved in sort of the idea of incorporating hip hop as an educational tool, as an educational intersection? Where did that first come about for you?
So I taught in my first part of my career. I taught in Dallas ISD, but I grew up in a very rural school district, all white school district. So stepping into a role of being a teacher in Dallas ISD was very different for me. Mm-hmm. And so I don't feel like I did very well in the beginning of my career. I wasn't very prepared, given the program that I was in. And so then my second master's degree that I got was actually through UT Austin. Okay. And I went into a program to be an ed leadership, but it was focused, it was centered around urban education. So this is where I started to really get into and learn how to talk about race, talk about culture, and get into those conversations and what that really meant in education and how that impacted the classroom. And then I got certified to be a principal, and then very quickly decided that really wasn't my passion. Mathematics is more my passion. So I've done studies in, like, I have a meta-analysis out that looks at research in numeracy development, doing numeracy interventions with children when they're young, and how that can really impact their mathematics learning. Yeah. So mathematics is really my passion, and how we teach mathematics. And then when I went on to get my doctorate degree, I wanted to look at African American achievement in mathematics, because that's where, when we look at the data, that's where we're always seeing, when we're disaggregating the data, you have, and in Dallas we had mostly Hispanic, but then some African American population. Very few white students in Dallas. Right. But it's looking at, like, why does the data look the way that it does, right? Mm-hmm. And so when I went to get my doctorate, that's what I wanted to study. And then I found HipHopEd, and I actually found HipHopEd through Gloria Latson Billings. Okay. I had met her at a conference in Canada, and I watched a talk that she did called Hip Hop, Hip Hope. And she mentioned the HipHopEd chat. And so I started chatting online and getting involved in that. And very quickly, and, you know, I read several articles about HipHop education, HipHop pedagogy. And I started to think about all the students that I had taught. And when they talked about hip hop identity students, I got really excited because I was like, these are the students that I taught. These are this is their identity. Right. And so, but I had never heard that before.
That connection hadn't been made in your teaching when you were learning.
I didn't grow up in the hip hop culture. So the town that I grew up in was very racist. And so it's just, you know, that wasn't something that I grew up with. And so seeing that, you know, hip hop identity, I really got excited, wanted to start to study that, got involved in the chats. I actually reached out to a local hip hop artist. I wanted to bring it into my math methods classroom because when I was a student going to get my PhD, I also taught at the University of St. Thomas. I was a grad assistant, and so I taught math methods courses. And so I brought him in to talk about hip hop culture because I had started to learn about hip hop culture, but me talking about it to my students didn't really make an impact. And so when I brought AV the Great, he's actually the co-author on the chapter I wrote in the new HipHopEd compilation. And the reason for that is he helped me so much in the work that I did. His contribution to that was invaluable for me. And so I reached out to him and I would talk about what I wanted to implement in my classroom. He came in and talked about hip hop culture, and it just really made a difference. And what I started to notice started to really think about was the students that I was teaching it was an elementary math methods course. So most elementary teachers are female. Very rarely did I have a male student. Most of our students were white. And watching them interact with AV, they had never really interacted with anybody that was hip hop.
Right.
And so they really, I think it really impacted them listening to him talk about the culture and talk about his experiences as a student.
Right.
And then at some point I reached out to him too, and I said, I had never been to a hip hop show. And so I started going to hip hop shows in Denton. I started out in Denton going there since that was his area. Right. He's from Southeast Denton. So started
he's a performing artist as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, he's a rapper.
Yep.
And so I started going to shows in Denton and got to know local Denton artists. And then eventually I started going to more shows in Dallas, you know, which is close by. And sort of built a network of artists that I know now that I can reach out to when I have questions or if I need something, or, you know, I've had a couple of them come to my classroom and even into my college classroom to guest lecture. So
nice. It's always good to get the practitioners involved. You know, some people we hear that sometimes with hip hop education that and some, not y'all, because y'all do it right, but there's some people that maybe poke around but don't actually involve the actual, you know, participants and practitioners of the culture, you know, into the mix. And I think that's super important. I want to take it sort of real cursory level. We talk about this stuff. We, you know, read the journals, write for the journals. But a lot of times outside of our familiarity with hip hop and education as a mix, people are a little bit unaware of the concept or skeptical of the concept on a very surface level, especially with math. You know, a lot of times we can see how a hip hop mindset or hip hop styles or hip hop methods could be used in language arts. That's, you know, we can see how that works.
Right. We
can see how it works with the Science Genius program. We can see how it works with, you know, some of the more, you know, wordy subject areas. I remember being at a Columbia University engagement with Summer McCoy, Summer from Hip Hop Hacks, and Martha Diaz from the Hip Hop Education Center. And, you know, we were having this little side discussion and people were coming over and educators and, you know, asking about this intersection. And someone said, well, can math teach, you know, help us teach calculus? You know, kind of scoffing at the notion. Yeah, of course it can. It can help us teach anything. But from looking at it from a mathematics point and dealing with the students, there's a whole lot of elements here. How would I have answered that question to this man who felt like this was a weird, unholy matrimony?
Okay. So a lot of it's about how we teach though too. So a lot of hip hop pedagogy is not necessarily the content, but how we teach it. And so how we frame it for students. But I think that one of the things that we can do, so one of the things I did with my pre-service teachers that I talk about a little bit in the chapter that I wrote was we did a math rap battle. And the way that I did that, because it was elementary, is it's not that they didn't just pick a math concept to rap about like they do in Science Genius. Right. So the way I did it was they had to do a battle within the lyrics. And so they had to pick opposing concepts. Addition and subtraction, multiplication and division. They had to choose those opposing concepts and then battle those concepts. Okay, so prime numbers, composite numbers. And the reason that was important is because students, first of all, they got the opportunity to try to write lyrics, which was a lot harder than they thought it was going to be, I think. Right. And then, but if you did this with elementary students, one of the things in mathematics is that we need to know how those concepts connect to one another. It's not just that they're opposing, but there's a connection there. Right. And so those addition and subtraction connect to one another. When we're solving equations in algebra, that's important to understand that those are opposite operations. Right. And so that connects what we learn in elementary school. When I talk about numeracy and numerical fluency, what we learn in elementary school is such a big foundation for students. When we get up to teaching them algebra and calculus, they're not going to understand those particular areas of mathematics without understanding the basics. Right. Without understanding that basic and having that basic numerical fluency. And so numerical fluency isn't just being able to add and subtract, it's being able to understand how those two concepts connect to one another. Right. And so when they battled the concepts. And then they had to write a hook that talked about how those concepts were related. Got it. So there was a specific way that I had them do the battles. Right. This is more not just like you said, picking a concept and rapping about it as if it exists, but having a mastery or at least a strong knowledge of how they intertwine with other concepts and intertwine, like you said, with opposing concepts specifically, because that gives you a real understanding of how these things work together as opposed to just existing. Right. In practice, how do you see the difference teaching this way? Just, I guess anecdotally, like, how does it feel? What do you see? How do you judge or gauge that this works as good as, if not better than, more traditional standard ways of getting these concepts across to young people? I think that when I first started teaching, I really didn't understand. I heard about culturally relevant teaching, culturally responsive teaching, what those things were. We went to trainings, all of that, but I didn't really understand what that meant, especially in mathematics. I had a hard time understanding exactly what that meant, because most of the time you don't have teachers who teach mathematics come in and do those trainings. Right. And so, but what HipHopEd did for me was it gave me tools. It gave me like some concrete ways and tools to start to think about, how do I implement this in my classroom? And there are things that we can do. I know like Gloria Latson-Billings and Bettina Love both talk about, the simple, simply doing raps for memorization in mathematics. And it's not that that's wrong to do, I don't think. It's just that it can be broader. Hip hop is a lot broader than that. Right. When we talk about, another example for mathematics is when we talk about graffiti artists. Graffiti artists do their sketches and, they do their sketches first, and then they do it on a larger canvas. That's proportionality. Mm-hmm. That's taking something from being very small and making it onto a very large campus. And there are proportional relationships there that you could explore through mathematics. Right, the scale and all that, yeah. Yeah, and so there's a lot more that we can explore, even looking at music itself, looking at, music bars, like putting bars together and, quarter notes, half notes, whole notes, eighth notes, 16th notes, how all of those fractions relate to one another to make a whole. Right. there's so many ways that we can look at music and at hip hop through, you know, and look at it through mathematically.
Right.
And what I found talking to hip hop artists, you know, when I do talk to hip hop artists about it, is that they see the connection. You know, they see the connection to mathematics, but math teachers don't tend to, because we want to teach in a very traditional way.
Right. I think, and I had actually both Dr. Latson Billings and Dr. Love on this show in the early days, and one of the things that I remember Bettina Love saying was that, you know, all this stuff, a lot of this stuff, the stuff you talk about, not just using it as a rote memorization, you know, style of learning,
right,
but this sort of, you know, critical thinking, social emotional intelligence, this way of looking at the subject matter through a hip hop lens is something that hip hop folks know, they just do it naturally. But we don't, you know, they don't always know how to put it into words or translate it into the school setting, but the general skills needed, the general perspectives are all there in young people, especially whose language and lifestyle and ethos is hip hop. You
right.
agree?
Exactly. And I think that a lot of, you know, and something very basic that I tell pre-service teachers is that you're coming at this, especially if you're not part of the hip hop culture. One of the biggest things you can do is allow your students to be hip hop. If that's what they are, if that's what they're bringing into the classroom, allow them the space to be that. And to teach you what the culture is, teach you what their culture is and what culture they want to bring into the classroom.
Right. Meet them where they're at.
Right. And one of the things I think, a big thing too, I think I've learned through being part of HipHopEd is just the amount of love and the amount of, it's hard to describe because it's so, it's something you feel, but it's very hard to describe to me. Like it's just this awesome kind of love that you feel being part of that group. Yeah. But and if you bring that into your classroom, you're going to get so much more out of your students.
Yeah. It's the intersection, education, hip hop is also, I'm not very smart, sort of Venn diagram attached to social justice. The idea that teaching better, especially to communities and young people that have been traditionally underrepresented, under-resourced, underfunded, underappreciated, under everything, can enhance. Again, this show is called Hip Hop Can Save America. How can we save America? By giving everyone a more equitable opportunity. How can we do that? We can do that through hip hop in some of the ways you're talking about. How much of a social justice umbrella do you feel this whole intersection of using hip hop in your teaching, and specifically math, but overall the hip hop ed kind of idea, the ethos, social justice, how does that play a part?
And I think for me, you know, because, you know, I'm not specifically teaching math right now. I'm teaching pre-service teachers. Right. And so I think for me, I take it into that program, right? And I try to make sure that, you know, I elevate certain voices. So I can give students, you know, I can talk about equity, I can talk about social justice, but how do I do that without giving an example, right? And so I try to elevate certain voices. I obviously, you know, I bring in like Chris Emden a lot of time, you know, look at his TED Talks.
Sure.
You know, I look at Bettina Love's work. We look at Jamila Lyscott, her stuff. And then, but then like last semester, I brought in, we did a video conference. We were able to do a video conference with Jay Rawls and John Robinson for the youth, you know, the youth culture pedagogy. And so I brought them in, and I think it's good to bring that in. And then one of the other things that I try to do is I try to involve local hip hop artists in my work.
Right. You're very involved in the local scene.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I've got involved in the local hip hop scene here in the DFW area. And so I know a lot of artists. And so what I try to do is I do try to bring them into the classroom or try to do, you know, things with them. And what I found talking to them is a lot of them want to get involved in education.
Right.
It's just knowing how to do that. It's knowing how to navigate the education system.
Yeah.
And I did have an artist 2 years ago. We did a video. The school that I was at, the principal allowed me to, got permission to, and got the students involved in the school that I was at, to do a video. He had a song called Walking Tall, and it was about bullying. And it was about his experience. He wrote it with his own experience being bullied, and he wanted to do a video to that, but he wanted to use students. Right. And so I actually was able to get my principal to agree to that, and we got the students, got all the permission forms and all that kind of stuff. And then we went up to the school on a weekend, and we made this video for Walking Tall. So Motion is the artist for that, but he experienced that kind of bullying because he immigrated here with his parents to Moore, Oklahoma. So so he was in Oklahoma growing up, and you can imagine immigrating. He immigrated from Iran, and so imagine immigrating here and being in Moore, Oklahoma, and with the population that's there. And so he experienced a lot of bullying in that setting. Right. And so that's what prompted the song that he wrote, and then we were able to create a video from that.
That's dope. It's great when you have obviously administration and other entities that have not always been traditionally accepting to progressive thought or progressive methods of interacting in the educational space. Have you always had have you had pushback? Have you had hesitation when trying to work some of this stuff in?
Oh, for sure. And that's a lot of times, especially with mathematics being a highly tested course. Right. You always, and I teach middle school, so it's tested every single year in middle school. State tests are always there. And so yeah, I definitely have gotten some pushback when I did try to implement things in the classroom because of the concern about testing. Yeah. And the more folks like yourself do the work and get the receipts and show that these things are working and they're effective and they're helpful, that helps obviously the next generation of progressive minded teachers to bring this in. What do you say to when you talk to, I assume you might, or if not hypothetically, to teachers who are hip hop minded, starting to get into the hip hop ed movement, start to understand these things can happen, but are facing kind of pushback from maybe administration or parents? How do you guys deal with that? And I think that's definitely possible, and I think you have to work sometimes within the system that you're in. Right. And sometimes you have to be a little bit quieter about what you're doing in your classroom. So, just so that you can do what you want to do in your classroom. Right. But then I think you have to work, like I said, you're going to have to work within the system that you're in. Yeah. But you can certainly bring in, even if you can't bring in everything that you want, you can certainly bring in a hip hop mindset. Right. Into the classroom. Can't stop that. You can't stop how you build your classroom. Building a positive learning environment, they can't stop that. That's something that you're supposed to do as a teacher. That's something that you're observed on. So when you developing the culture in your classroom is definitely something that you can do without that pushback. Got it. Over the years that you've been doing this and involved with it and being involved with these ideas, have you found that it's been more accepted? I guess it depends. I know it depends on where you're at and what kind of situation, but it depends on the principal. It depends on the school. I think that something I'm kind of turning toward now is, I think hip hop ed is certainly being more accepted, like when you're talking about urban spaces. But I think that what we're doing needs to move into suburban and rural schools. Right. When we talk about, like I said, I grew up in a rural school district that was all white or mostly white. Right. And so how do we take the ideas that we're looking at? We talk about social justice and we talk about, that social consciousness. How do we take that into more rural school districts?
Right.
And that's where I think you would definitely get a lot of parent pushback, depending on how what you brought in. But
Sure.
I think that's really the goal, is to get it, is to bring it into schools that are predominantly white, because they need that exposure too.
Right.
They need those conversations. They need to learn the correct history, because that's, I definitely think that I was missing something when I first went into teaching, because I didn't learn those things.
Right. I often ask this question. You answered it already, but it's the question I often ask the hip hop educators, or hip hop based education folks, is say, of course, there's attention paid to Black and brown communities, inner cities, and but these are universal approaches that actually could and do work as effectively across all demographics, across all sections and areas, with an added bonus, I think, of giving that sort of cultural awareness, that understanding that they may not have been previously exposed to. And you're saying that from someone who wasn't, and now seeing what I could have been, yes and yes.
Yes.
And that's and that would be highly beneficial to anyone entering this space, I would imagine.
Right.
Speaking about space and things like that, you were given space in the new HipHopEd compilation book, the HipHopEd, the compilation on HipHop Education Volume 2, which is Hip Hop as Praxis and Social Justice. Again, you mentioned you and AV the Great contributed a chapter to that, which I will read off of this paper. It says, creating a shared energy through hip hop to advance the pedagogy of math pre-service educators. Shared energy. Can you talk a little bit about the shared energy part of that, of this chapter?
Sure. So when I was working on that particular study, that actually wound up being my dissertation too. So that we worked on, and so this is out of part of my dissertation work. And one of the things that one of my committee members wanted me to, I guess when I originally put it in there, it didn't have a name. And so they're like, it needs a name. Like, what your intervention that you did needs a name. And I was like, okay. So of course, like for me, since AV helped me so much, I went to him, him and I had a conversation, had a discussion about, okay, so what are we going to call this? Because he was involved in helping me develop my curriculum. And we had several conversations over the semesters of things that I was doing in the classroom. And so, so when we talked about it, we talked about shared energy through hip hop, because there's an energy that we had to share together, right? There's this space that we had to get into together. We had to talk about, okay, what am I going to do? Am I being true to hip hop culture when I do this,
Right.
and trying to make sure that I'm doing these things correctly as a white woman.
Right.
And as somebody who is new to the culture, now I feel like I'm part of the culture, because I, become part of the hip hop community here in the DFW area. But right. At first, I didn't feel like I was part of it. I didn't feel like I was part of hip hop. And so I wanted to make sure that whatever I was bringing into the classroom, I was doing it in the correct way.
Right.
And so to be able to do that, I had to ask him, because he's the expert on hip hop for me.
Right. Right.
And so when we talked about, there's this shared energy between the two of us. And then when we take it into a space, there's a shared energy within that space.
Right.
And so that's how we came up with that particular a name for the intervention that we did.
Right. I like it because it does kind of it implies that it's not just of a transference of information, but it's sort of a co-joining, working together. So working together as teachers teaching teachers, and then working together as teachers educating young people, which I think sits at the heart of sort of the culturally relevant and hip hop ed styles of teaching, is that meet them where they are, involve them in the teaching, kind of put it all together in that way. And if you do that in the right way, you can have great results. Once again, and I just want to say, this is, if you're just tuning in now on the live stream, this is Hip Hop Can Save America, the podcast. We're doing it live through the month of September, Monday through Thursdays, and then a special drop on the podcast feed on Friday. So please do subscribe to that. Want to shout out to the sponsor of this segment, Newsbeat Podcast, which is a social justice podcast that incorporates hip hop. It's social justice journalism. We like to say it's as if Democracy Now! And Black Thought had a podcast, baby. So you should definitely check that out. Newsbeat Podcast, wherever you find podcasts. And just continuing the conversation before we wrap up. Again, it's anecdotal. I'm trying to get like a sort of a feeling out of this. I know we're very, this is praxis and we can, wordy words. But just especially with young people, but across the board, even teaching teachers, teachers who are going into this field, what benefits, and we've touched on a positive aspects of this. We touched on a few. Why is this, in your mind, just necessary? The way to do it, it has to be done this way. Is that how you feel?
Yeah, I do, and I think that one of the things in my own practice is that have to be very reflective. In the chapter, I talk about my own background, and I talked about it here, what my background is, and that certainly impacts what I do now.
Right.
And I think that one of the biggest things that needs to happen, especially when we have pre-service teacher populations that are predominantly white, secondary ed, we have more of a mix of male and female. Right. Elementary ed, we have, a high percentage of female.
Right.
But in education in general, high percentage of white and female. And so how do we start that process in the program of them reflecting on their practice? When, I talk about working with AV and that shared energy, one of the big things is that when he steps up to be the teacher in the classroom, I give him, he comes in as a guest lecturer and he steps up to be the teacher. I sit down as a learner, and, when we're talking, I'm learning from him. He's the teacher now, he's the expert.
Right.
And I think it's important, even as a teacher, to be able to understand that you're not always the expert in the room. Sometimes you are, but not always.
Interesting.
So I think that you have to be able to step back and to learn. Last semester, I was asked to do the diversity and equity in the seminar courses that we were doing. There's actually quite a few professors in that class. There's several, like 3 or 4 of us in that class. Mm-hmm. So we each take days to do, different lessons with the students. And I was asked to do the diversity and equity lesson. And so we looked at the TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story. I don't know if that's one that you've seen before. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie is the one that does that one. And so we looked at that particular TED Talk, and one of the things, and so she's talking about the single story, like what single story do you have of someone else? She's talking about the single story of books, like if you only see books written a certain way, then this is what you expect, right? This is the stories. If these are the only stories that you see, then this is what you expect.
Right.
And so we looked at that, and we had a really powerful moment, I think. I asked students to look at, and they had to write down, what's a single story somebody thought about me, and what's a single story that I've thought about somebody else. And they didn't have to share out loud. I didn't do it like that. I had them kind of, they did it on note cards, and I did like a side A, side B, and kind of like I was thinking of like a cassette tape. And so,
nice.
But then they had to, in their group, this is before all the social distancing, but in their group, they had to pass the note cards around, and they just read them. So there wasn't this reading out loud or anything. But I actually had a student that at the end of it, and we talked about the experience of it, he admitted, he said, where you asked me to think about a single story somebody thought about me, and he was a white male.
Right.
He said, I had a really hard time coming up with something. And on the other side, where single story he thought about somebody else, he said, I had a hard time deciding which one I wanted to write down that wasn't too embarrassing.
Right.
And so it's really getting them to, and then I shared about my own my own experiences, my own past, where I grew up, everything. And it's about that reflective process. To be able to get into this work, you're going to have to reflect on yourself first.
Right.
You're going to have to reflect on yourself and your own culture first before you get into this work. You have to be willing to do that.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important to bring that into, when we talk about pre-service teachers, bring that into the programs, because they can start to learn new things as they get out of the classroom. The whole point of HipHopEd is to learn from your students, right?
Right.
And so it's not about giving them all the pieces to what HipHop pedagogy is, but it is starting that process of reflection and how you can come into the classroom and ask your students, be willing to step back as a teacher and say, okay, I'm going to learn from you.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it also works with those who are connected to the culture a lot, as much as those, like you say, coming into it and trying to figure it out. Make sure you're doing it in an authentic manner. Make sure you're not stepping on cultural toes.
Right.
I interviewed Dr. Lauren Kelly for this podcast. She's out of Rutgers education department, and she co-authored a paper. I think it was when keeping it real goes wrong in HipHop education. And it's a very reflective thing. I am of the culture, and I'm teaching teachers, or we're trying to teach young kids, but we have to navigate the way to do that sometimes. We have to recognize that, yes, we want to give them, space, but giving them too much authority sometimes works against, because they're not used to being in a position of authority. So you're trying to give them too much, ability. And there's a lot of factors to weigh when you're trying to figure out. So the reflective nature of it, and that's exactly what the paper was about, kind of looking back at a semester and saying, here's what we did, here's what we could have done better, here's what worked, here's what didn't. I'm the son of an educator. My dad was a distinguished professor of sociology. And from what I know, I went to college for about 26 minutes. Cobbler's son has no shoes, right? But from what I learned, as a teacher, you're constantly learning, supposed to be, better ways to teach.
Exactly.
It kind of makes sense, right? And that comes from, again, not just having a one-way interaction with students, whether they be students or teachers. It's got to be collaborative. It's got to be reflective. I think that's very valuable, and I appreciate that perspective. Lastly, before I let you go, pardon me, how has pandemic life changed your educational career right now? What changes have you made, or what's going on with?
Right now, our university is completely online.
Yeah.
So we're still trying to navigate, because I have student teachers that are out in the field. So they have to go out in the field, but I'm not supposed to. So, their school district, the school district that my student teachers are in, started off online, but they're eventually going to go in person. But then, schools still don't really want extra people in the building, taking students in, taking teachers in, but they don't want like extra people walking around. So, having to do observations is different. So we're having to video or Zoom in or, do something to do observations for student teachers, and trying to do all this. And then, our classes are web-based, but they're originally supposed to be in person. So the ones that were originally supposed to be in person, I still do meet with students, but then there's this thing, you can't really necessarily require them to meet with you online, because there may be other things going on and other factors. And so, but it's beneficial for them to meet online. And so, I do have actually students, even though I'm not requiring it, they are logging in, we're having a conversation, we're talking about the assignments, I'm giving them, some extra things to think about as they work on their online assignments.
Yeah.
And then our student teachers, it's a seminar course. And so they do have to get online with us. It's not like every week. So it's like, scheduled throughout the semester, where we have different, big chunks of time that we sit with them, and we go over some things. And then I have some weekly meetings with them just to kind of check in with them. I'm trying to check in with them, make sure they're doing okay. Kind of check in with their mental health at this point, because they are out in the field, and it's new for the teachers too. So you have mentor teachers. We're having to pair them with mentor teachers, but mentor teachers, this is all new for them too, teaching online,
Yeah.
having to start the school year out like that. And then now in a week or so, students are going to be coming to campus, what that means. You're going to have students wearing masks, all this other stuff. And so that's brand new for the teachers that are mentoring them.
Right.
So I'm trying to make sure that I'm navigating, trying to make sure I'm checking on my residents and trying to make sure I check on my mentor teachers, trying to make sure we're not overwhelming anybody throughout this process. So
yeah. Can be kind of, I have a 5-year-old and she's doing the distance learning and we're figuring it all out as parents now, but have to become teachers too. So, God bless you. All I can say.
And I have a friend right now that she's, my goddaughter's mother, she's a teacher. So she's about to have to go back and they're starting out online learning, but so is her daughter. Her daughter's in kindergarten. And so, what does she do with her daughter during the day? She can take her up to campus with her or whatever, but it's like, she's got to teach her classes and try to monitor a 5-year-old doing her classes online. So,
yeah, man. Yeah, no, it's, interesting times, but you know what can give us some sense of being able to get out of this hip hop. We know how to create something from chaos and make it wonderful and beautiful.
Exactly.
And that's the spirit of it. And hip hop can hack everything, and it can hack this situation. It can certainly has been improving the education space. I'm in awe at the HipHopEd movement. Those officially kind of attached to it, and anyone who has that mindset. I hope that teachers hear this and see the work that you guys are doing, and find inspiration in it, because y'all have the receipts. You're showing that it works, and anything to help deliver better equity and universal enlightenment to the educational field is valuable, in my opinion. So I thank you for your time. I thank you for your work. Is there anything that I haven't brought up that you're involved in or need to let people know about, or can look into this sort of thing more, besides obviously the HipHopEd chat, which happens online on Twitter Tuesdays 9 p.m. Eastern, and of course the book, the compilation, this is the second edition.
Yeah, there's the first one too. So and then we also have the Youth Culture Power that Jay Rawls and John Robinson did, is actually published through HipHopEd. So, so their work is really important too, using youth culture. So not just hip hop, but using the youth culture as an avenue in your classroom too.
Right.
And they really start to kind of get down to how do we really empower youth? And I think it really listen to them, and so they actually have some tools for that.
Yeah, I know them. I got to get them on here as well. Good work and good.
They're awesome.
Yeah, fantastic.
Awesome guys.
Great cosign. Lastly, this is the question I asked folks. I know we've touched upon a lot of this, in the entire interview, but this is the name of the podcast. Hip hop can save America. It's sort of a lofty concept, and it involves a lot of things, and we need a little bit more than hip hop these days to save, I think, America. But that being said, I do like to ask folks, in your perspective, in your opinion, through all that you've done involving hip hop in the education space, why does hip hop need to be at the table of discussions when we talk about real ways to improve lives and livelihoods and communities across the country, in your opinion?
So I think hip hop really does elevate that social consciousness. And then, like I said before, when I went into HipHopEd and the very first HipHopEd conference I went to, talking to them online, the very first conference I went to, just felt so much love and acceptance, and just this embrace that, and even in my local hip hop community, the same thing. Once I got to know different artists in my local hip hop community, that love and that community that's there is so important. And it's that feeling is just, it's very undescribable to be a part of those communities. So
I know it. Well, that's one thing hip hop does. Mm-hmm. It can bring people together, and we've seen it, throughout the world.
Right.
And here we're seeing it throughout many, many industries. I thank you for your time, for giving us the perspective. I'm always excited to learn about how this stuff is actually working in practice.
Right.
And this is very interesting to me, and I hope to everyone else. I thank you for your time, and I thank you for your work. I really do. I respect what you do, and especially in these trying times. So we thank you.
Well, thanks for having me.
Dr. Cason, thank you so much. All right. Well, there you go. Getting back to my main screen. Thank you for putting up with me in this technological mayhem that I have put this together. Once again, there you have it. Beautiful discussion, discussing teaching teachers, discussing how hip hop can intersect with math and really all educational avenues. Do check out Dr. Cason's contribution to the HipHopEd book series, the compilation on HipHop Education Volume 2, Hip Hop as Praxis and Social Justice. Co-authored the chapter with AV the Great called Creating a Shared Energy Through Hip Hop to Advance the Pedagogy of Math Pre-Service Educators. Smart stuff happens here. This is the world's smartest hip hop podcast, and you can tell why. I'm not always so smart, so I rely on the really smart people to tell me what the heck is going on when it comes to the intersection of hip hop in other areas. So thank you again, Dr. Marti Cason, for coming through. I really appreciate it, especially in the midst of the education season. So it's really dope. Once again, the HipHopEd chat has come up today many times. Shouts to the HipHopEd family. Respect them. Have some representatives from that movement coming up in future, very near future episodes of this Hip Hop Could Save America, the podcast, both the live and the special Friday bonus edition that appears magically on your podcast feed. So once again, to recap, the world's smartest hip hop podcast. We talk about the intersection of hip hop and areas like education, science and technology, health and wellness, the fine arts, politics, activism, and social justice, and many spirituality, self-help, healing, all these things here. I don't know anywhere else. I don't know any other hip hop podcast that does all this stuff. So just saying, subscribe on your podcast feed, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get podcasts. Search for Hip Hop Can Save America. And again, follow us on the Facebooks and the Twitters. Just do the Google search. My name is Manny Faces. You can find me as well. And keep in contact with us to follow more of these kinds of stories. Lastly, the newsletter, once again, the Hip Hop Advocate newsletter can be found at hiphopadvocacy.org. It is a semi-regular curation and collection of articles, just like the kind of stuff we just talked about. So if you're into smart applications, innovative applications, inspiring, educational, uplifting, or any kind of application of hip-hop that improves humanity in some way, we collect those stories. We send them out to you. We give you hope that hip-hop indeed can save America, if not the world. My name is Manny Faces. You can support this work at Patreon, patreon.com/Manny Faces. It's been up there the whole time on the screen if you're watching live. And we'll be back Monday through Thursday for the entire month of September 2020. This is quite an endeavor. Thank you for putting up with a couple of, stutters and such. We had a little bit of the interview, didn't make it to the live stream at the very, very beginning. Thank you to associate producer Cindy for all your hard work. Shouts to OG associate producer Summer, who is always helping and contributing as well. My name is Manny Faces. This is Hip Hop Can Save America, the live podcast. We'll be back tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern with an icon in the world of, should I tell you or should I just make you tune in? I don't know. Who's listening this far? Who's listening this long? You'll get a bonus. Hip-hop photography, y'all. An icon in the field of hip-hop photography and archiving. So tune in tomorrow, 1 p.m. Eastern. It's your man, Manny Faces. I'm out. Peace.